What's a company that's viewed pretty positively today but has a dark history? Chiquita. They once funded rebels in a South American country to overthrow the government in order to have land to build banana plantations. Banana plantations are famously laborious places. If you've ever heard the song "Come Mr. Tallyman, Tally Me Banana," that's what it is about. DuPont is still one of the largest textile companies in the world, and Dark Waters was a true story. If you haven't seen it, do. It's about how making Teflon poisons everything forever. Food Lion, which goes by many different names throughout the world, had a scandal in the early 90s where they bleached meat and repackaged it. There was a case about 20 years ago where an undercover reporter slipped into a Food Lion and filmed what they were doing. What they were doing was pretty bad. Food Lion actually sued the reporter and news organization for trespassing, and kind of unbelievably, they won. This was quite the landmark case in undercover journalism. Susan G. Komen. More people volunteer their time and money for it than any other breast cancer charity. I vaguely recall they kept almost half of the donations for themselves. They called it administration expenses. They've also been labeled with pinkwashing, defined as organizations getting disproportionate publicity for donating very little. Charity Navigator had rated them one of the worst charities for breast cancer, bottom 10%. Another despicable thing they do is sue any charity who dares use a slogan that is in any way similar to them. They literally spend donated money to go after other charities. Not a specific company, but an industry, Hollywood. During the late 1930s, Hollywood put a ban on anti-Nazi propaganda in films since they had a big market in Europe and didn't want to step on toes. The notable exception was Warner Brothers. Jack and Harry Warner family left Germany and came to America. The brothers saw the threat of fascism. They were the first studio to create anti-Hitler content. Chaplin produced it himself, but United Artists distributed The Great Dictator. H&M is now recognized and beloved as a sustainable, eco-friendly company with great worker rights, but they used to be really corrupt and would use underpaid workers in third world countries who worked in horrible and dangerous conditions. They also used to use horrible cheap materials that would cause massive pollution and wouldn't be able to be recycled. Oh wait, they still do that. My bad, you guys. Don't forget that H&M is one of the brands that use forced labor of the Uyghurs in the concentration camps. We are in 2021 and their clothes are literally made by slaves. IBM sold the Nazis punch card computers to keep track of every person in concentration camps. The computers also kept the trains running on time. IBM. Not only that, they set up a subsidiary with Germany specifically to do this, even though America said American companies weren't allowed to do business with them anymore. It wasn't even like IBM built computers and the Nazis bought them. Suckers specifically set up a secret company and designed these computers especially for them. Apparently it's why they don't ever give interviews. Oneida. Today, it is a company that mainly manufactures and sells silverware, dinnerware and cookware, but it actually started out as a Christian community founded by John Humphrey Noyes that eventually turned into nothing less than a cult that believed in the establishment of a kingdom of God on earth. Among the darker aspects of the cult was the practicing of pedophilia, eugenics and incest. Noyes believed he could actually breed a superior specimen of humanity by having a child with his own niece. I came here to say this as well. Who would have thought such a banal brand could have such a messed up origin? Apparently Apple. They were knowingly using child labor for about 3 years along with using people in concentration camps in China to manufacture their parts. They probably still are. I'd probably say Chiquita, formerly the United Fruit Company. What I thought was an innocent fruit company has actually been involved in American intervention in Latin America for decades. I don't remember all of the details, so I could be wrong, but here's an example. When the then president of Guatemala Jacobo Arbenz instituted land reforms that would have taken away a large chunk of United Fruit land, United Fruit lobbied to the CIA and argued that the government was aligned with the Soviets. Moreover, the director of the CIA at the time, Alan Dulles, was a board member of United Fruit. His brother, Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, worked for a corporate firm that represented United Fruit. There were a lot more people in government who had deep ties to United Fruit. Not to put too fine a point on it, but Arbenz was fricked. The CIA overthrew him. After the overthrow, the CIA installed a military dictatorship that reversed the land reforms and exacted revenge on trade unions among other groups people aligned with Arbenz. This and other like interventions led to the coinage of the term banana republic to describe such a servile dictatorship. Thanks, this is super interesting and exactly the wormhole read I was looking for. Microsoft under Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer paid staff to sabotage competitors' software. Later on, one of the first instances of this got named DOS isn't done until Lotus won't run. As an analogy, pretend Microsoft made and sold Michelin tires. It was like they paid people to go into parking lots and slash your car's tires if you had bought Bridgestone, Goodyear, Yokohama, or Pirelli. It did make Bill Gates one of the richest men in the world, though. No one becomes a billionaire without being a C, I guess. Boy, my time to shine has come. One December day in 2017, when I was between schools and doing odd jobs, I was doing a sort of promotional thing for a company called Degussa. They're a German company who today specializes in gold and other precious metals. Essentially, me and the others occupied several positions in Zurich's main station to hand out chocolates and flyers to passers-by. Well, the day goes on. I go home and tell my dad about what I did today, as you do. He goes on to explain how that company was in the headlines shortly after World War II for manufacturing Zyklon B, the pesticide used in the gas chambers of Nazi concentration camps. They're viewed fairly okay, but this is a stain on their history. They also ended up halting the construction of Denkmal für die ermordeten Juden Europas, the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe, for a bit because Degussa made the anti-graffiti coating for it and some journalists and activists called it out. Devious Diamonds. They've distanced themselves from the blood diamond trade recently by claiming conflict-free mining and starting programs focused on local entrepreneurship, but the scars across Africa remain today. Millions have been killed. Not quite as dark as others, but Nintendo started out as a failing business. At the same time, everyone stopped making Hanafuda cards because they had become popular with the Yakuza. So Nintendo saw this as a perfect opportunity and their cards were very popular with organized crime bosses. In the 60s and 70s, these cards were no longer quite as popular and Nintendo tried all sorts of ventures. A taxi service, a disc-shaped remote control vacuum cleaner, their own brand of Lego-like bricks. One of these was a love hotel, essentially a hotel where one would arrange a meeting with a prostitute. They eventually settled on video games. I feel like it's known but not talked about, but Krupp pretty much played all sides in most major wars over the last few centuries, then were extremely bold boys during World War II. Decided people had forgotten about that around 1951. They were right, and now they make pretty much everything that's big and steal. No, we can't lay the blame directly on all the companies that cooperated with the Nazis, but we can sure as frick point to Krupp and say you made this possible, you used slaves to do it, and by the way you fueled hundreds of years of arms races, you made it happen. Not exactly. Krupps were sentenced to Nuremberg trials. They were ardent Nazi supporters and greatly benefited from it. The life expectancy of workers in their factories was numbered in days. Krupps was stripped of all property in his sentence, but in 1949 he was pardoned and property returned by Western nations. Surprise, nobody has mentioned the entire fashion clothing industry yet. Literally every company that gets its fabrics made overseas in places like Vietnam, Bangladesh and Cambodia. These companies are taking advantage of workers in countries where people are desperate enough to work for pennies on the dollar. This also applies to a lot of the plastics and electronics industry. ABN AMRO, in the NL, is currently just another boring bank, but it has a bit of a dodgy history. The main legal ancestor of this bank is the NHM, Nederlandse Handelsmaatschappij. The NHM was the main trading company, monopolist, in the 1800s in Dutch East India, Indonesia. The Indonesians were forced to use a fifth of their land for whatever crop the NL authorities deemed necessary. The NHM transported and sold these crops, and made a profit this way. Several other partly Dutch companies have a dark past through a Dutch ancestor company exploiting Indonesia. Hugo Boss, high-end clothing company today, but Hugo the man was a little Nazi, produced uniforms for the Nazi troops during World War II and used actual slave labor to do it. It's a company built by Nazis, for Nazis, on the back of slave labor. It's absolutely disgusting that anyone would wear clothing with their logo on it today. Andrew Carnegie is known as a philanthropist due mostly to the 2,509 free libraries he built around the world. His generosity was, in part, an attempt to redeem himself after he sent in 300 Pinkerton, then convinced the PA governor to supply 8,000 militiamen to break the Homestead strike. 16 men were killed, countless severely injured, and the union was quashed. Andrew Carnegie promptly lengthened the workday and further cut the steel workers' wages. Classic Carnegie. Hudson's Bay Company, or the Bay, has a pretty dark history, responsible for a lot of the early settlement of Canada and theft of native lands to fuel their beaver fur trade. They ravaged Aboriginal populations, stole their lands and fought wars here, all in the name of trade. A lot of early North American colonization was done by HBC. There's a lot of information out there that details this time. Some of it is pretty difficult to read, how they treated the Aboriginal people. Thanks for taking it to Canada. In only slight irony, the Bay is basically currently getting evicted from most of their mall spaces in BC right now. Coca-Cola hired hitmen from the AUK, Auto Defenses Unidas de Colombia, to kill 10 union leaders in Colombia. This occurred as recently from 1990 to 2002. BP also has dirt on them for funding the AUK. Just as a side note, thanks to their excellent PR firms, it's been kept under wraps pretty well. Siemens is a global corporation that was involved in the Holocaust. They built the trains that transported Jews to the camps and were involved in a variety of industries supporting the Nazis. They had over 200,000 workers at the height of the war and forced tens of thousands of workers to work against their will. Crazy how times change. Now they make trains for public transit and are a major player. They built the trains that transported Jews to the camps and were involved in a variety of industries supporting the Nazis. From my understanding, trains weren't built specifically for this. The Nazis just used boxcars and cattle cars that they already had. Kind of the opposite. Coca-Cola seems to have a problem with all of their South American union organizers going missing or turning up dead recently. Siemens, Krupp, BMW, Volkswagen, Porsche, IBM, Bayer, BASF all contributed to heinous acts in the name of the Nazi war effort. Actually, most pre-World War II German companies, including Hugo Boss, Ford Motor Company, the old man, Henry Ford, was a control freak and created a department in his company that spied on every aspect of employees' lives and tried to mandate ideal behavior. Oh yeah, and he published volumes of anti-Semitic propaganda, to the point that Hitler called him an inspiration, with the Nazis awarding him the Grand Cross of the German Eagle in 1938. Pretty much any Fortune 500 company or any large business in America has a shady past. That is why these companies spend so much money on PR and advertising. The Dow Chemical Company manufactured napalm from 1964 to 1969 for American armed forces to drop on North Vietnam villages. Today, the company is being praised for providing free hand sanitizer to hospitals. I would say this is a sad common story for most of the chemical companies. They have supported their countries during wartime and now is a huge dark mark in their past. Dow with napalm, Monsanto with orange agent, BASF with the Nazi era, former IG Farben, together with Bayer. Celestial Seasonings Tea was founded by a dude who was part of a super racist cult that believed in aliens. Like so racist he actually does care if you're red, yellow, green, blue or purple. Chiquita Banana. They organized and funded death squads in Central America to suppress labor unions and terrorize agriculture workers. Banana Republic. In 1904, the American author O. Henry coined the term to describe Honduras and neighboring countries under economic exploitation by US corporations, such as the United Fruit Company. Quite a few Austrian winemakers, actually, you see, Austrian wine is normally quite delectable. In fact, nowadays it's considered among the best. However, In the 70s and 80s, many of the winemakers were caught using a substance called ethylene glycol to artificially sweeten the wines. The catch is that ethylene glycol is very toxic, causing things such as renal failure, organ damage, liver failure, metabolic acidosis, your blood becomes too acidic for the body, motor problems, brain damage, and in large enough quantities, death. And they were putting this crap in wine. Naturally, people freaked out upon reading in that day's morning newspaper that their wine could kill them. One poor Saugnap drank so much tainted wine that he wound up nuking his liver. He lived, but it obviously wasn't fun for him. When the winemaker's executives were arrested, tried and convicted, they blamed the vineyards, and by extension the grape farmers, for adding the substance, which was bulls. Then they blamed the Austrian and German governments for crappy testing. Testing had been updated to be more efficient than ever following an anonymous tip, but lack of information around what? How was anyone else supposed to know the wine had been made toxic? To this day, absolutely none of the executives that were indicted and jailed take any responsibility for their actions. Nowadays, however, Austrian wine is considered some of the best in the world, thanks in no part due to the fact that the antifreeze wine had been dumped, and now it all goes through a very strict testing before it can be shipped to the public. This is awesome. I mean, obviously not the antifreeze wine thing, but a good read, thanks. Ford Motor Company used to pay off widows of men who died when their cars exploded because that was cheaper than recalling the exploding engines. Edit. Exploding gas tanks, not engines. ValueJet had a notoriously lax safety protocol, but after a terrible accident where a load hazardous materials took out a passenger jet, they avoided a lot of bad publicity by becoming AirTran, which was later absorbed by JetBlue. Kinda concerned by the sheer quantity of still existing companies involved with the wrong side of World War II in this threat. Sheesh. Just wait until, if, the Chinese genocide and slave labor is fully exposed, most companies you deal with now are complicit and benefiting greatly from it. IBM, today one of the biggest companies in IT, but supported the Nazis organizing the Holocaust with punch cards for registering everything. Plenty of people think IBM may only be slightly less evil today than when they were working for the Nazis. I think the reason why Hawaii is a US state is because they have pineapples and the Dole Fruit Company wanted them, so they raided Hawaii. Freaking Nestle. They think they're so healthy and friendly when they have child slaves picking freaking chocolate for them, stealing local water from streams, ponds, or lakes and sell it for a high price. And they refuse to acknowledge the sins they have brought upon humanity. And they're like the Disney of foods. They buy and buy and buy so that there is no way to avoid them. I swear it's a freaking conspiracy that they know our efforts of avoiding giving them any money, and miraculously, bam, new product they've acquired that you didn't know was owned by them. You know, call me a Catholic, be whatever you want. But mark my freaking words. If Jesus says Satan is prince of this world, then the CEO of Nestle is one of his many faces, if not the main face of Satan. Nestle is the kind of company that would go to Neptune or Europa to harvest the freaking water from there, and even if there was life on those godforsaken worlds, they wouldn't give two shoots. Nestle deserves that hate that it gets, and if I had the power of God, I would use fire and brimstone from the sky space to destroy each Nestle HQ. If not the main CEO, the world would be better off without Nestle and other companies like them. Frick Nestle. Good food, good life, more like hail Satan, hail Nestle, fricking hacks all of them. Frick those pieces of shoots. A lot of Disney movies. McDonald's. It's not super duper dark, but what most people don't know is how it got to be popular. When it was owned by the two original brothers, it was considered innovative. The man who offered for them to expand was a failed investor who decided to take some last chance. It ended up working out, and the investor was able to buy the original McDonald brothers out of the business, and they received no recognition or financial benefits afterwards. Also, the investor divorced his wife for a younger woman who'd been managing other locations. That can be their new tagline, not super duper dark. I like that line. That, or apparently at least we didn't make burgers for the Nazis. When reading all this, it's tempting to think that the response should be to stop buying from these guilty corporations. But that presumes that a decade's delayed marginal decrease in sales will be a meaningful deterrent to supporting or committing atrocities, and b, that's the alternative corporations that you could buy from instead would have behaved differently in a similar situation. I think a much more meaningful response is to recognize that corporations are inherently immoral and that their power in society should be closely guarded. Nestle. It's a huge Swiss company with many subsidiaries, including Gerber and Starbucks. In the 70s, they marketed infant formula to third world mothers who couldn't afford it. They thought it was better than their own milk, so they bought it and fed their babies sparingly. The babies got ill and or starved. These days, Nestle is drying up public water sources in the US to sell in plastic bottles. They paid off the US Forest Service for this privilege. Boss, Ford, Porsche, Maybach, all heavily involved with Hitler. Boss, I believe, made Nazi uniforms. Ford donated all German profits to Nazis. Porsche were desperate to make Nazi tanks but never successfully made any that entered battle from what I remember, and Maybach made Nazi tank engines. There is also evidence Ford used forced Jewish slave labor from concentration camps. Also, Nestle, for among other evil acts, strongly encouraging poor African women to use bottles instead of breastfeeding, giving women a supply of milk to last a week. Just enough so the mum's milk would dry up, forcing them to spend huge percentages of their income on milk, bribing nurses to encourage women into it. They also currently oppose proposed anti-slavery laws. Nestle define corporate evil. Nike. Not even history. They are literally using forced Chinese child and adult slavery to make their products, right now as we speak. I know a couple who work for Nike. It's like a cult. Nike seminars, Nike vacations, Nike weekends, etc. I asked them about the child labor thing and they got super weird about it. Flip-flopping between that is just business and that doesn't happen. It's not exactly history, but anything Musk touches is viewed as the greatest thing ever, even though it's pretty crap. Objectively speaking, Tesla is among the brands with the most flaws that require repair in new vehicles. And the cars are rated among the most dangerous repeatedly. That's because not only is the car itself completely crap at protecting you ice, but also because it has features like putting controls of things like wipers or blinkers behind a touchscreen software, which is not only bad because it takes time and distracts the driver, but there's a reason that having safety features not be directly electrically controlled is a no-go. And that reason is that software control means they're affected in case the software has an error. Imagine your wipers not working during heavy rain because there's a bug in the GPS. The boring company literally makes a far less efficient, much more expensive, much slower subway, not to mention things like working conditions, child labor, and throwing out anyone who dares criticize the company and cracking down on unions. Or the fact that building process on the new factory in Germany has been halted multiple times now, because Musk's approach to things like taxes, procedures or public interests is to ignore them, which might work in the US but gets you shut down in Germany. In 2018, Bayer acquired Monsanto, which included the product Roundup, weed killer. The main ingredient in Roundup is glyphosate, which is the world's most popular chemical, with approximately 250 million pounds used each year in the US, and 1.65 billion pounds used globally. Growing research suggests that glyphosate causes a form of cancer called non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. In 2015, the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer found glyphosate to be a probable cause of cancer in humans. California's State Environmental Protection Agency has also declared it a probable carcinogen. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.